Feel the magic, join the remembering. Hello, Cisco.
Well, hello.
So, I'm going to start with a quote I have at the beginning of my book. I believe in love of land, each other, and all living beings. I'm a hippie. Are you?
Yeah, I guess put it that way, I am.
How would you put it? What would you say being a hippie is?
Oh, well, there's a lot of different definitions and ways to think of it. Not all of them are complimentary or um,
True, yeah.
it's something I'd like to identify with.
Hmm.
Living here in Taos, there's definitely a group of off the grid, off the beaten path, anti establishment kind of people that I don't totally identify with as much as I used to when I was younger, having, become part of the establishment over the years. I mean, I'm one of the examples of a hippie that did well in the business world in Taos.
Yeah.
There's, like Sid's grocery store, very successful grocery store. He was one of my hippie buddies back in the day. Polly Ray, who started the John Dunn Boardwalk. She was part of the that crowd back in the day. Let's see, Joe Franzetti started Metric Motors.
Oh, brilliant.
The
Yeah.
whole group of us that, desperate to make a living, we tried all sorts of different things and fell into, business establishment kind of things and saw some value in the other side also. So it's uh, creating a balance, but maintaining the hippie values.
I identify with being a hippie. And for me, some of the things that made me feel that was my love of nature and my love of the animals and wanting to be in the moment and, not let my life pass me by just focusing too much on making money. Actually remembering that, money is something that's kind of been invented by human beings rather than an inherent part of our birthright. Did you identify with the counterculture movement when you were younger? I mean, for me, that involved like the draft. Were you worried about the draft at any point? And I
Oh,
mean, yeah.
that was a huge influence on my life, more than anything else. I had great influences on my life, but the draft was the major uh, happening that pushed me to do the things that I did, really. Because back in those days, you had to register when you're 18, and the war in Vietnam was raging, and they were taking thousands of young men, especially if you weren't in college,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. And I was torn because I grew up in a military family and I understood that kind of mindset that I was, surrounded by. I had a very good friend whose older brother was in Vietnam and used to send letters and photos. He'd send, the latest Viet Cong he had killed, hanging upside down just like a dead deer. And he actually came back from Vietnam with a necklace of human ears of people he had killed. His thing was, fight to be a man, prove you're worthwhile, fight for freedom, fight for your country, all this propaganda. And being young and dumb was like, oh, okay, yeah, I kind of get that. I can see that. And then at the same time, I had another dear friend who was a long haired, placard carrying anti war person. And I understood that part too. And I was very torn between the two ideologies. And so I prayed to God to help make the decision because I didn't know if I should go or not. And I said, God, you got to help me make this very, very important decision. Um, so you gotta give me a sign, please. And to make it easy on you, God, the sign will be my draft number. So I waited anxiously by the TV as they were drawing the numbers because they draw your birthday and that date has a certain number. So there's 365 numbers. They were taking up to about 120, 130, depending on how the war surged or ebbed, is how many they would call. And my draft number was number two. I was definitely going. It's a sign
Wow.
from God. I'm going. I asked for a sign from God. It's number two. There's no question. So I'm fine with that. So I get ready uh, to go to the physical and all that. And my mom gets real sick and gets sent to the hospital where she has a hysterectomy and spends many days recovering. And in the hospital was a young man, was one of the very few people to get a conscientious objector status. If you could convince your draft board that you were conscientiously objecting to going to war, then they would let you stay out of the draft, and you would have to serve in a hospital changing bedpans basically for 2 years. And so that's what he was doing. And he found out that I was going. So he asked my mom permission to talk to me. And I met him. Really nice guy. We talked about a lot of different things. When it was time to leave, he said, "Look, I hear you're going. Do me a favor and read this book. And if you don't want to go, contact me. I'll tell you how to stay out." And so he gave me this little book, Dalton Trumbo's Johnny Got His Gun,
Wow.
which was a very profound story. It was banned in the United States at that time. It was actually an underground book, in
Okay.
the land of the free.
Okay.
And once I finished the book, I realized, yeah, I don't want to go.
But what was it about his book that made you decide you didn't want to go? Having been, mixed feelings. I know that people with the GI Bill from the Second World War got to go to college and kind of became wealthier because they fought. There was that incentive, wasn't
Right.
it? But
Like my dad,
yeah,
my
I
dad's a
bet.
perfect
Yeah.
example of that. He went to college and had a good job and did very well for his family. Yeah, well, the book is real short, and it's a basic story about a guy who's been wounded in a battle. It's some kind of horrible explosion, and he wakes up and he has total amnesia. Doesn't know who he is, where he is, what the battle was. He doesn't know anything at all. And chapter by chapter, he realizes, oh, I'm blind. I don't have ears. I don't have a mouth. I don't have an arm. I don't have legs. He's just
Oh,
a
okay.
torso with a head with no senses. And so he spends the next 10 years banging his head on the pillow. And then the nurse who's been taking care of him for those 10 years realizes, oh my God, that's Morse code. And so she starts tapping on his chest. And the first thing that he tells her, like, get me out of here. I can make my own way through the world. And she goes, you don't realize what kind of condition you're in. And he goes, yes, I do. All you got to do is put me in a glass box and take me to every state fair, rodeo, football game, every public gathering with a sign that says, to all the mothers, sisters, daughters of men missing in action, could I be your husband, brother, father? And put a little donation thing, I'll be fine. So after reading that, I realized, the horrors of war, and, the thought of coming back maimed, blind, disfigured mentally, physically. And I didn't want to go.
Quickly into my next question, which
Uh-huh.
is make love, not war. So, we have spoken before, and, I just think that the hippie era was one of the sexiest times. So, as much as you were drawn by the anti-establishment, I think there was something else that kind of drew you into the whole hippie thing.
Well, yeah. Being a young man of a certain age, my attention, my focus was on girls. Every stupid thing that I did was I was trying to impress a girl. That was the major drive in my life, was trying to figure out how to meet girls, be near girls, impress girls.
Where were you brought up? I can't remember.
I was actually born and raised in Los Alamos, the
Yeah,
atomic city.
yeah.
It was interesting because of the national labs, the Atomic Energy Commission back then, and our dads worked at the labs building the bombs that the anti-war movement was against. You get a certain age and you start becoming a little more rebellious against your parents. It's a natural thing, so you can bust away. The stuff they were saying, our fathers are doing these horrible things, and you've got to break away from it. You got to be a grain of sand in the war machine. You're small and tiny, but there's enough of us that we get enough sand in there, it'll break the machine. And so it made sense. Our dads were not allowed to talk about what they were doing, but they were working on weapons of mass destruction, literally. And
Literally.
so it made sense to part of the rebellion process was, yeah, be anti-war. And then really, when you think about it, decent human being, you were definitely anti-war. It's not that hard to figure out.
Yeah. I mean, and then, I mean, the nature of the Vietnam War was very different. I mean, I think it's a kind of, for me personally from England, it's a bit of a legacy of kind of of American wars. You know, when we were fighting wars and beforehand, the Second World War, you know, you felt like your borders were being invaded. It was a kind of very clear border fight. Here you were being called to fight a really nasty war, and it was a little bit ambiguous to, as you say, a young kid who was at just the beginning of their life, you know, really rather make love, not war, you know.
Yeah, it was an interesting time because not just the anti-war message, but these older hippie mentors that I was hanging out with, they were saying some wild, wild stuff like you can make electricity from the sun and you can make electricity from the wind and all this crazy, crazy stuff. Um, and the whole idea of sharing and being open and loving just really appealed to me.
It's community and looking after each other and reciprocity. And I mean, for me, you know, that is about having human relationships that are kind of living, you know, and I start to kind of use the analogy of like it's like an ecosystem. We were becoming very separate from nature, and I feel that part of the hippie movement was about reconnecting with each other, but also with land and water. So, you know, you say that you know, you ended up kind of going anti, you know, going back to establishment and making a living. But you made a living, I think, in a very kind of hippie way, and that's a
Oh
compliment.
yeah, totally. Yeah, this was not the normal path to making a living, that's for sure.
Absolutely.
Um, and that's what allowed me to, to participate in the normal society is because I was offering that outside edge and connecting people to nature and connecting people to the environment and connecting people to their families and to themselves. Because what happens out there on the river is very profound. The energies that the river has physically can balance the human condition physically, mentally, and spiritually. That's a fact. Scientists have proven that. Moving water releases ions, it has the ability. So I'm super lucky that I found a way to make a living. And when I look at my clientele, a big majority of it are conservative, Republican, right wing, born again, the total opposite of me and my friends.
Oh, that's interesting. Do you have
And
any
that's because,
theories on that? Any theories on that, or just that they
well,
just money
yeah,
to pay
it's
you, or you know?
if you're a lefty, then you do rafting on your own,
Okay.
or you just can't afford it.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
if you're on the right, conservative, you're making enough money, you can afford to hire people like me to take you down. So that it's an issue in our company because when we're giving, there are some groups where we have to be careful. We don't talk politics with them. We like to plant the seed here and there, especially in regards to protecting public land and waters. Hey, you're enjoying this water. This is everybody's water. We need to protect it. You plant those little seeds, but we have to be very careful because when we're trying to educate them about the geology of the area, some people are very offended when we say, well, the rocks on the left are 2 billion years old and the rocks on the right are 5 million years old, because to them, the earth is only 7,000 years old. And so that's totally goes against their teachings. And
Really, that's
we offend them by saying that.
really that's
Right.
extraordinary, isn't it?
And normally the guides wouldn't care, but that means their tips are smaller.
Part of the hippie movement for me was about freedom, and we do find ourselves similar times again in terms of kind of inquiring about what that is. And, you know, I mean, it is the freedom to have our own beliefs and our freedom to be able to say what we want to say. And yet, this is a perfect example of what we find ourselves in times where, I mean, I also believe that the planet's old, but you know, it's just, do you know what I mean? Like the sense of like,
Yeah.
how do you navigate the fact that people are existing in very different realities? And I mean, I feel like water kind of great connector. And so, when you're doing the river runs with people, you're able to connect with people separate from these kind of separating ideologies. Like the power of water does do that, doesn't it?
Right, exactly. I mean, we're all made up of water. Every time you take a breath, you're actually breathing water. That's what relative humidity is. It's measuring the water that's in the air. All air around the world has water in it, and that water is connected with all other water. So every time you're taking a breath, you're breathing water that connects you with every other living thing. By the way,
Yeah, and the other thing I just thought, as you said that, it made me realize is it's like it's very visceral, the sense that you can't own it. Like water, you're on the river, it's passing underneath you, it's flowing, it's raining, it's draining away. Even in our own bodies, we're kind of passing it out. No sooner has it gone back in again, we sweat it, we cry it, as human beings, like trying to kind of understand these
right. Well,
concepts.
there's a really interesting physiological fact where when you breathe in, there's a gas exchange that happens in the alveoli, which are tiny little bulbs that line the lungs, and that's where the gas exchange happens. Carbon dioxide, oxygen. There's a microscopic layer of water that lines those alveoli little bulbs, and scientists have not been able to figure out, is that part of your body or is that part of the atmosphere? That's where we connect with everything right there.
There you go. That's amazing. I haven't heard that. That's incredible. I've even had somebody talk about how even within our brains, there may be a little kind of aerial that means that we're actually connecting to the whole all the
Oh,
time.
yeah. I had occasion, I can't make my living rafting year round. Well, now I do, but back in the early days, I had to take jobs to pay my rafting debts, actually. And I did a lot of construction. And in that construction, I became familiar with electricity. And then I built a house and I got the homeowner's plumbing license and the homeowner's electrical license. And in the study of learning more about electricity, when you have a conductor, a wire, and electricity is flowing through it, you have to be very, very careful because when you bundle wires together, this electricity flow has a valence. That's why you don't stand next to microwaves when they're on, because there's this sphere of influence, this energy that actually folds back into itself in an infinity kind of pattern. It doesn't just shoot out, it actually folds back on itself. And that valence these electrical wires have, and if you bundle too many of them together at a certain voltage and a certain amperage, it can actually cause a fire and be dangerous. So you have to be aware of the valence. And so then it occurred to me that human beings are electrical chemical generators, and we also have a valence. That's what many people called an aura,
Yeah.
and it's our fear of influence. So if you're more aware, more sensitive to that, you can actually utilize your sphere of influence, your aura, to better your life. And it's interesting because, like, when you meet somebody and you get close to them and you instantly like them, your auras, your energies are reciprocal, probably, is one way of looking at it, also.
Yeah, I like that a lot.
And the opposite happens too. When you meet somebody who's like, ugh, they're repelling each other. So our fear of influence isn't just our physical body, but it's also the aura around us. And different people have different types, different strengths, that kind of thing. The ability of the aura energy is pretty vast.
Is it something that you consciously work with in yourself? And how would you go about that?
Yeah, a little bit of it's interesting because if you dedicate all your energies into developing your aura, pretty soon you're going to dissolve as a human being. To be a human being is a finite, isolated, limited experience, and that's what we're after, to have that particular human being experience. Otherwise, you're getting out into other realms of existence that you're no longer a human being, basically.
My sister passed away too young, and so she communicated to me after she passed away that I asked her if she was okay, and she said that she was fine, that it was fine. But she said to me that enjoy your senses because being human is about the sensory experience. That is the unique thing to human life. So she was saying that you have freedom, you have all these other blissful experiences on the other side, but human life is about your body. And I just,
Yes.
I kind of spirit, energies, whatever you want to call it, this experience of actually being in a body on this planet now, experiencing joy, experiencing all of these anger, the complex feelings, feeling the touch on your skin, making love, dancing, being on the water and feeling the water splash on your face and the adrenaline and the fear that it's a bit too much and you've got yourself into a pickle.
And that is the beauty of the hippie experience,
Yeah.
is it encouraged us and allowed us to have the very fullest human experience possible. Because if you were stuck in the, Judeo-Christian moral mindset, then you were very, very limited to what you were going to experience. Granted, that's a type of experience also, and I'm not putting it down, but for the full human experience, following the hippie path that I did allowed me to really have some profound experiences and steep in wonderful knowledge and happenings.
Yes. That actually being a hippie was what opened you up to these opportunities.
Yeah, I mean the whole, countercultural, but the also the use of uh, mind altering substances
Yes.
was very key to the whole experience.
And did
Um,
you get involved in that ceremonially, or was that purely like a kind of hippie decadence thing that you were doing it from?
well, it started off a hippie decadence thing, and then later on, there was some ceremony. I didn't really like the ceremony as much.
Interesting. Okay.
Um, Pretty much just a hippie exploration experiential.
And in England, we had this something called the Summer of Love in 87, 88. This came about because of rhythmic beats, techno music, and the introduction of ecstasy. That then led to like other psychedelics like acid. And I mean, I definitely feel that they were profound experiences, as you say, being with friends, the kind of breakdown of the barriers, the sense of being part of something, seeing the unseen. These were factors for me that certainly opened my mind a bit. How was it for you?
Well, having older people influencing us, guiding us, suggesting to us, telling us what to do was a major part of it. There was also heroin was a big part of the counterculture that I was around, and the terrible destruction that
Mm.
brings. I mean, it's kind of weird because at the same time, you see these creative people. It seemed like the more creative you were, then the more likely you were to be a substance abuser, especially heroin. And I lost a lot of friends to heroin addiction. And I also have friends that lived with their heroin addiction for many, many, many years and had creative, useful professional lives.
What's interesting for me in this conversation is that my grandfather fought in both wars, both the First World War and the Second World War, and
Wow.
actually was injured in the second. He then was treated with morphine and
Mm.
actually became an addict. And so he was getting morphine off the black market for years before they acknowledged the fact that they'd actually created these heroin addicts. One of the things in my book I explore is freedom something you run to or is it something you fight for? The hippies were, to some extent, I think, they were looking for a freedom from establishment of freedom, but yet
Yeah.
the drugs and heroin, I would think it's quite difficult to get to America.
Mexico grows a lot of opium.
Does it really?
And
Okay.
so there's a major trade route
Okay.
from Mexico right through Albuquerque, right through northern New Mexico, up to Denver, and then Denver branches out. You know that the Espanola Valley has the most heroin overdose deaths in the United States per capita since they started taking those statistics. It's changed to fentanyl, but it's
Yeah.
still a very major problem in northern New Mexico. And I was young, I noticed that and made a serious attempt to stay away from that kind of stuff as much as I could. So hence the psychedelics were more appealing.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Because they
and
were
again,
definitely non-addictive, weren't they? I mean, they were. I mean, they may become habitually. You may get used to want to do it, but they weren't an
you're right.
addictive thing. Like heroin is like a very addictive
Yeah,
drug.
physically,
Yeah,
yeah, it takes you over. I mean, you could get addicted to anything, and I certainly knew some people that did way too much LSD and
yeah,
suffered
yeah.
for it. I did LSD a couple times. I really didn't like it. I didn't like the way it made my body feel, and it was just too a little too wild, too weird. But there was other substances. One popular one we used to do a lot was wood rose, which is
Really?
very much a hallucinogenic, but it doesn't have the heavy body high that LSD has. It was purely visual. It was pretty remarkable experiment with all the natural things that were around the area, especially sacred datura. And of course, marijuana back then was so weak.
I know it's a different story now, isn't it? Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I mean, we used to buy kilos of marijuana from El Paso border guards that had confiscated it, and they were selling it to us dozens and dozens of bricks at a time for $25 a brick. And they finally started bringing so much we couldn't keep up with them, so they moved on. Um, and then one day I moved to Taos. My dad had called me back to Los Alamos to help him with some remodeling. I was at the house alone eating lunch, and the doorbell rang, and I went over there. And this old friend of mine I hadn't seen since high school, and he said, "You're the only person I could think of that knows what to do with this." And he handed me a 25-pound bag of fresh peyote buttons. And so
That's a
my
lot, isn't it? Isn't that quite a lot of
yeah,
peyote?
it's a tremendous amount of peyote. So then I knew that there was the Native American Indian Church in Taos. I actually worked with some people, and they taught me how to use the peyote. And we had a lot of interesting adventures with that. A lot of interesting adventures with that.
So did you think that the psychedelics, how did they influence this ability to connect with life in this way that you felt wasn't accessible to you from your family life?
Um, I mean, it's interesting that I never thought of using psychedelics on my own. It was always peer or mentor pressure. The
Okay.
only time I remember thinking of it my own is I wanted to try marijuana when I was 14. So this would be in 1966. And it took me a while, and I found some. The older brother of one of my good friends, and I scored a marijuana cigarette, a joint, and I tried to find somebody to share it with me, but I couldn't. And several days went by, and I decided, well, nobody wants to do this with me. I think I'll just do it on my own. So I went off into the woods, and I sat under a shady tree, and I took, more than several puffs off of this marijuana cigarette. And I remember sitting there thinking, hmm, if this was working, which it obviously isn't working. If this was working, I'd be thinking about zebras or something. And then all of a sudden, all these images of zebras started flooding my mind. Yeah. And I remember when we were 16, the first time we ever did cocaine, because we'd heard about cocaine. Everybody's doing cocaine. And
Uh-huh.
so we finally scored some, and, we snorted it. And, cocaine gives you energy. It makes you feel
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
Well, when you're
Yeah.
16, you already are full of energy and feel good. So that did absolutely nothing for us. So we went back to the dealer and demanded our money back.
In a very manic way, I imagine.
Yeah, definitely. But again, I was very aware because I saw, several friends drop off the cliff with the use of those illicit substances. And I was aware that I needed to be careful, and I'm glad that I
Yeah.
was.
I think I tried it a couple of times just because people were around me, and I had been a bulimic before, so I just thought, why do you want to vomit? A friend of mine that was a heroin addict, and I remember she vomited before she'd even taken it. Like the anticipation of it in her body was so strong, like the physicality of that relationship. I was like, whoa,
Yeah. I remember one of my friends, I mean, this is how weird it got. He was a needle freak. He didn't care what he was shooting as long as he was sticking a needle in his arm. And he actually came over to my apartment one day and, hey man, you got it, got anything to shoot, anything to shoot? And no, I got nothing. I got nothing. And he found a empty bottle of wine laying on the floor. And so he put a little water and swished it around and he shot that up just because the act of shooting he was addicted to. I actually saw him mix up some Drano and stick it in his vein. He didn't inject it
Is
into
he
his vein.
still
He
alive?
just
Is this guy still alive?
no, oh no,
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 sorry, sorry. But I was just thinking, whoa, that
no,
does
no,
sound
yeah,
like a
no.
bit of a mission, doesn't it?
He died at a young age.
Oh, fuck.
But
Oh,
yeah, he would leave the needle in his arm, and it would fizz. He didn't inject it into himself because that would have killed him for sure. But he loved the way that it fizzed in his vein. I mean, completely nuts. And he
wow.
was a very, very skilled, talented artist. He had a very young age. And that
That's
was the weird part
amazing.
is a
Yeah,
lot of very, very
talented.
talented, skilled people were heroin addicts.
I think there's an element of being an artist. I'm an artist myself, so and I've struggled with some types of addictions over the years, and so I think for me there's an element of sensitivity in
Yeah,
there.
well, I have never injected heroin. I was injected with morphine in a severe medical crisis, so I don't think that counts. I did smoke heroin one time, and that was interesting. Snorted heroin one time. I didn't know it was.
Okay, there you go.
It was that peer pressure, older kid, here, snort this. What is it? It's dope. Well, what is it? It's dope. Snort it. Well, what is it? Just snort it.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, when you're in that
Stupid me, I
environment,
did.
well, that's boys being boys as well, a bit, isn't there? I mean,
Well, yeah, that's true. Probably trying to impress a girl.
yeah. So I mean, it makes me think a little bit of the analogy of the river again. Like, were you doing some quite extreme rapids at time? Because that's quite
Oh, yeah.
adrenaline inducing and also quite risky.
Well, yeah, I mean, in the early days, it was common for us to chew a peyote button before we went rafting. Just one.
Just one.
Yeah. And I think that was partly because the act of river rafting is kind of an otherworldly thing. When you're doing the big, giant, violent water, I
Hmm.
remember the first many times that I went down in somebody else's boat, I was just flabbergasted. How can they even know where they are and all this chaos, this
Mm,
maelstrom
mm,
of
mm,
all this
mm.
crashing, raging, loud, dangerous water? How do they find their way? And as you do it over and over, then you start recognizing certain features, and there's actually a mindset that's different than normal. It's skiers can relate to this because if you're skiing the really steep, deep, especially through trees, you
Mm.
have to have a different way of looking at things, a different way of doing things to accomplish that. And same thing with the big whitewater, the big giant rapids, especially if you've got, you know, 8 people in your boat and you're the only ones that has oars and their lives are literally in your hands. Um, it's an other mindset. A total, not a normal person couldn't just step in there and do that.
I mean, I used to be a bit of a surfer. I kind of came with this kind of water hippie analogy. And,
Mm-hmm.
when I think about like the big wave surfers, they can practice on that wave when it's small and invariably kind of build up. So, and actually the thing about a reef break is it will actually always break at the same way. It's just going to be bigger. So you kind of get a chance
Right.
to ease your way into it, but I don't, that's not necessarily the same, is it? I mean, you're only going to be able to do a particular stretch of a rapid when there's a lot of water around. I don't know, I'm asking you that's much of a question, isn't
Well, yeah, like the Taos Box where the world famous rapids are, it takes a certain amount of water to get through there. In my day, we used to do 300 CFS, cubic feet per second. I would go down to 300 feet, and then that would be the end of the season.
it? Hmm.
Um, and in earlier times when I was learning, we would never do it below 1,000 because the equipment couldn't handle it. But
Okay.
as the equipment got better, then I could do it down to 300. But nowadays, these young kids, because they were raised differently, they won't do below 600.
Oh, really interesting.
Yeah, because the way I was raised and the way they were raised are so different because they were raised playing soccer. When I was a kid, we never even heard of soccer. on teams where you didn't keep score, everybody wins, everybody gets a
Mm,
trophy.
mm,
You know,
mm.
you don't drink out of the garden hose. You know, you do away with risk as much as possible. Where, you know, in my day, we never wore helmets when we rode bicycles. We drank out of the garden hose. You know, if you didn't win, you're a loser.
Yeah, yeah. So what do you think that mindset is? Are you completely relaxed? Have you got rid of like any other concerns? So you're just putting all your energy into that moment? You know, that's where the adrenaline comes in a
Yeah,
bit, you think? Yeah.
it's definitely an adrenaline fueled, hyper focused. You're not aware of anything else. It was years before I even knew what the canyon walls looked like in certain sections of
Yeah,
the gorge because
yeah.
my focus was so intent on the path through the rapids. I never got to look up and see the beautiful, dramatic walls of the canyon. Literally years before I was able to look up.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, invariably, the water is very dangerous in that place. It could kill you, but you must be entering into it with an element of trust in the flow of water. And especially as you learn to kind of understand its nuance better, cultivate, is that part of being in a different part of your mind? Because that kind of contradiction of being in something that's ultimately incredibly dangerous, but then also actually, if you ride with it, it's probably gonna get you down.
Yeah, I mean, if you have an understanding of how the physics and dynamics of what you're dealing with works, again, a lot of river runners are skiers because there's some similar aspects there.
Yeah, yeah, that makes
They're
sense.
gravity sports. It's
It's a
an
great
awareness, a
practice.
practice, a meditation, if you
Yeah,
will.
absolutely.
It's something that you can achieve. Again, it's not your everyday person doesn't experience this stuff. A lot of what I've done in my lifetime is way, way beyond ordinary. And
That's
it's
the
hard
truth.
to explain to
I get it.
somebody that, you
Yeah,
know, just sat in an office their entire career.
absolutely.
The
I mean,
responsibility,
there's a thrill in
the,
it though, isn't it? But do you manage,
oh,
did
yeah.
you manage to control, you've talked about your relationship to drugs being in the sense that you were able to know where the parameters were that you shouldn't go. Because, with skiers and because I'm a scuba diver and divers, I mean, people get to the point where they get so addicted to this stuff that they just take insane risks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, just like the drug heroin especially, you know, I saw that there's this boundary, there's this edge. I don't want to go over that. I'm willing to go up to the edge, but I'm already preparing to pull back from that edge. Same type of thing in skiing and in river rafting. There's some places, you know, I will not go, even though others may go there.
Yeah.
No, not for me. The risk is no longer worth it.
Yeah. It's an
The
interesting.
reward of that risk is no longer worth it. And as I got older, then there were more and more things I used to do that I don't anymore. Been there, done that. I don't have to do it again.
We start this conversation with, here you are a young man, kind of torn between the war, and then ultimately you decide that, you don't really want to get mutilated. One of the things I explore in my book is, do men need to go to war to be initiated? There is this thing, isn't there, of pushing it, and that's what makes great things happen when we're younger. That's what made energy from solar being not in this completely protected environment, but it's a relationship to that anyway.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting what you said about the experience of war. Um, I am glad that I did not have to experience the horrors of war,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
I'm perfectly fine without that being a part of my existence. I am
absolutely. Yeah,
okay with that.
yeah, absolutely. I think I was more addressing this idea of being younger and we become more risk averse as we get older. And so,
Yeah.
because I think the hippie movement, the counterculture movement, it was quite a youth-based energy.
When I look back at these memories that these discussions are popping up, I realize a lot of it was fostered and mentored by older, slightly older people, you
Hmm.
know, um, 5, 10 years older than me.
Yeah.
Um, the experience of living on a commune, That probably wouldn't have happened as well as it did unless we had older guidance and leadership in
Yes.
that. If it was just me and my friends, we would have done something really goofy and stupid.
Were you involved with New Buffalo? You were kind of more out towards Pilar.
Yeah, I was on Pilar Hill for
Yeah.
about 2 years. We were the southern end of the county. Hung out at New Buffalo every once in a while. It's interesting that Rick Klein, one of the founders of New Buffalo, and I became very good friends because through a set of circumstances, I did a complete 180 from my hippie life and
Mhm.
got involved in country western dancing.
Did you?
Go up to the Motherlode Saloon in Red River
Oh, that's
to
fun.
dance with the cowgirls up there, and the house band. Rick Klein was the drummer,
Oh,
the
was he?
one of the founders of New Buffalo, and we became good friends over that. Just kind of, it was a weird juxtaposition, just like opposites attract kind of thing. So
Yeah,
here's this
absolutely.
hippie from a commune playing in one of the most conservative towns in New Mexico to a bunch of Republican rednecks.
Were you, was the one in Pilar a back to the land commune? Were you
Oh yeah,
farming and animals and
yeah. We had big multi-acre gardens. We had cows and chickens and big grow holes, greenhouses. It was a 93,000 Forest Service lease that was in the name of the kids. There was an old mine there, and yeah, it was everybody had to figure out a way to make a living. Interesting things because it's tough to
I
make
was
a
gonna say,
living
and
off
how
the
did, and
land
what
is
about water there?
very, very
Do you have do you have a Sakias over there, or how was the?
well, yeah, but the water was extremely limited. They had a well that pumped like a gallon every half hour or something ridiculous. It was very, very precious. The one bathtub we had to have at least three people take a bath in that bath water. I always went down to the river.
Is this when you fell in love with the river, or was that prior to? How did you develop your love of the river?
Well,
Was it
no,
something?
growing up in Los Alamos, the
Yeah,
Rio Grande is right there. The
yeah.
gorge it's between Santa Fe and Los Alamos is twice as deep as the Rio Grande Gorge is up here.
Oh, is it
It's
really? Oh my God. Okay.
yes, and it has big rapids. Well, back then it
Okay.
had big
Okay.
rapids. The dam kind of drowned a bunch of them. So it's just natural young man nature to go to rivers, to go to moving water. And when you're standing next to moving water, then you jump in with inner tubes and have near death experiences. And so we'd come back, the next weekend and with bigger inner tubes, and but still, disaster. I remember pulling my friends out of the river with gashes in their heads, bleeding, semi-conscious. And so, being smart kids, took the bigger inner tubes and we tied them together. But same results. We didn't know we were running class 3 rapids at flood stage. So in the middle of the week, they pulled us out of class and took us to the principal's office. And there were the local Boy Scout leaders. And they said, "We heard what you young men have been doing. Why don't you wear life jackets?" And it was like, "Oh man, why didn't we think of that?" And so they took us
Duh.
under their wing and taught us how to canoe, kayak, and row boats and paddle guide. And that gave us the knowledge and the experience we needed when the first guy to start a commercial raft trip in Taos. And that's why I moved up to Taos, actually.
Okay.
He called us up. I was working as a carpenter. I was making $2 an hour. Awesome money. He said, "I hear you men know how to row the Taos box." Yeah, we do. He said, "Well, come on up. I got jobs for you. I'll pay you $25 a day." $25 a day? That's awesome. That
It's
was huge money. And that was, what, 1972.
22.
Yeah. But I've been coming up to Taos before, since the late 60s, actually, just curious about the hippies. I had some Native American friends I would visit. We always, hunted, fished, rock climbed, skied, and river rafted up here since we were early teenagers. So Taos has always been home in one form or another.
Yeah, well, it's a beautiful place. I can see why it's still. If the water was saying something to you back then, and if the water's saying something to you now, are they still saying the same things or are they saying different things?
That's an interesting and difficult question to some degree, and it's something I've thought about a lot, especially in my later life. I'm more than a third Native North American Indian. There's a lot of stuff in Native culture which I've been very lucky to be steeped in. You don't talk about.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's forbidden, Sometimes it's asked that you don't. I've noticed that modern physics have kind of given me a little bit of an explanation is if you observe something, you change it.
Yeah.
So if I talk about something, it changes it or it kind of misses the mark a little bit. And so, I hesitate to try and put into words the message that I'm trying to give. The best way to get the message that I have is come raft the river with me. You'll get more information than you'll ever use. It's powerful, it's profound, it's totally worthwhile. The be here now message, I think, is one of the most important. The more I try to practice it, the less I understand it, but the more success I have with it too. It's hard to categorize things and this is the way it works, point A to point B, which is the classic Western mindset.
Yeah.
In native way, it's circular, it's in spirals, you can start anywhere on the circular spiral. You're not going from point A to point B. You're just in there. You're be here now. You're with it. That's probably one of the most important things. And then respect and balance. Whatever you do in life, be sure you're doing it with respect and balance, and everything will be okay.
They're wonderful words, aren't they? I'm just kind of writing them down. Respect and balance.
Yeah, everything that you do, if you're doing it with respect and balance, then you're doing the right thing.
Yeah. And then being on the river, coming on a trip with you is certainly a step in that direction. It starts with self-respect. And I also think that that's another thing that the hippie time was about. Everybody was kind of part of this kind of rigid idea of what you was meant to be. And you
Right.
weren't really allowed to, be free to be who you wanted to be. But
Yeah.
I do feel like sovereignty starts with consent. We are taught how to be by our superiors, and we need community, we need family as our tool for learning how to be with each
Yep.
other. And respect is something that we certainly need to find more ways to kind of cultivate, no, for each other, for ourselves.
Yeah. And then the whole idea of freedom, I'm reminded of the old Bob Dylan line, are the birds free from the chains of the air? In whatever society you're in,
Yeah.
there are certain parameters that you're not totally free. It's just the reality of being of existing and being respectful and being balanced has its limits of what you can't do anything you want. Lessons of the hippie thing, especially the summer of love here in the United States in '67. It was we can do anything, be free, love everybody, and then immediately the horrible other side of the coin with the Manson murders happened, and
Yeah.
people were all of a sudden realized, oh, this whole thing about you know freedom has its limits.
Have you ever read Gloria Steiner's on the self-esteem?
No, I haven't.
The book is on self-esteem, and it's a really interesting book.
The feminist,
Yes, yeah. But her philosophy wasn't solely
yeah,
feminist. It was just this idea of some of the
uh-huh,
systems that we live in aren't ultimately giving you that birthright gift. That's what the hippie movement was starting to question, was this control, this maybe even this brainwashing to be part of this very hierarchical system where potentially it wasn't
right,
about we the people anymore. It was very much about who was going to get to the top and become very, very rich. And so that's maybe the freedom that I was kind of
right,
thinking of. But yes, absolutely. We live in a material
yeah,
world and there are physical constraints. One of the things I've had to learn in my life is the tension of creativity, like you were talking about earlier. I come to the analogy now of like the arrow won't fly unless you pull it back. That's one of the challenging lessons I've had to learn in this life. It just isn't going to be all joy. Do you know what I mean? That there's always going to be resistance. There's always going to be something because these are the forces that make things happen, as you know, with the river, as you know, with the gravity, as you know, with the
that's right,
onions. But I think we're going to have to come to an end, Cisco. And I
that's
just think,
right.
thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so much. This has really been fun.